Hey everybody, welcome back to Reluctant Call. Okay, so let's do a little bit about myself. I grew up Southern Baptist. Um, and when I say Southern Baptist, they really cared about eating. So there was a lot of events where people would just bring food and we would just have a feast and pig out, I guess you could say. I grew up Southern Baptist, and my pastor at the time, I won't give names or anything, but at the time he was ex-military and he was absolutely awesome. And a lot of what he said stuck with me, and I just absolutely love him and his family. He was an awesome example of what a man was, what a father was. He would always just have the time to speak to you no matter what, and still be there for his family, still be there for his kids. His kids love him, and didn't turn out like your stereotypical, pastor's kids kind of thing. And I was also blessed with a really, really great youth pastor. Again, won't use his name, rat him out or anything, but he was awesome. Youth pastor was absolutely great, on fire for Jesus, wasn't afraid what people thought of him, kind of thing. And I was blessed to have them in my life. And I came to be a Christian, being forced to go to church as a kid. I was just like, I don't know what this is all about. But I became a Christian because there was a guy that was in the military, and he was Coast Guard. For lack of a better way of putting it, not even remotely like good looking at all, but one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, one of the nicest men, and just from what I remember, absolutely awesome person to be around. Always had a smile, always was happy, always encouraging, and was just always like available to just talk to people. Well, I know because it was a small church of only, like, at that time, I want to say like 170 people. So I know that at that time he was praying constantly for a spouse, because he was lonely and wanted to have a spouse. And this new lady shows up to church, and she's absolutely beautiful, absolutely out of his league, kind of beautiful. And she was a total sweetheart, very nice, and they just hit it off. Next thing you know, a year later or so, after dating, they get married, and they're just the happiest couple. And it was not about the money, it was just about the love of Jesus with them. And unfortunately for her, she started having a lot of health problems, and she was also always in the hospital. She ended up getting a few limbs amputated, not all at once, but over a period of time. And just a lot of things as a newlywed couple kind of thing would be very difficult to go through, would be very heartbreaking, especially considering their young age. But man, she always had a smile on her face, was always on fire for Jesus, and you couldn't tell she was suffering anything at all. And she used that opportunity to reach so many people for Jesus. She helped nurses come to Jesus, she helped doctors come to Jesus. I mean, she was an awesome example of a follower of Christ. And man, that's the reason why. And I remember being a kid, seeing that, just going, yeah, this Jesus person, there's something real behind it. This isn't just, if I was going through that as a kid, I thought, man, if I was going through that, I would be angry, I'd be spiteful, I wouldn't want anything to do with God. Because obviously there would be no God if he was going to let me suffer that much. But man, was I wrong in seeing their faith and everything. And that's why I became a Christian, because that showed me there was something real to this, and it made me take it more seriously. And that was a huge reason why I got baptized in middle school was because of watching those two. So I became a Christian, went to church, did what everybody does after high school, when they have helicopter parents that don't let them have fun and do anything. And did a lot of stupid things, drugs, driving home so high that I don't even know how I got home, because I was so spaced out. And I mean like drives that were like, over 10 miles and over, an hour of driving. And I saw who I was after the breakup, and just, that's not who I wanted to be. I was always angry, I was always miserable, I was always depressed, and always had the smoke. I would go through an ounce of weed at a time, probably 2 ounces a week. And if you know anything about that, that's a lot at that time. I think I was spending like $600 a week just to get high. And luckily I had a good paying job at that moment, but it was just a waste of money looking back at it. And I realized that's not who I wanted to be. So I tried to get back in the church, helped out with the youth, saw what was going on with the youth program at the church I grew up at, wanted to help out. And my friend took over because the youth pastor left, and it was awesome. He did a lot of preaching. I got my life back in order. I did a little bit of talking about my experience and how the drugs and everything, it's not worth it. Having that lifestyle was not worth it, and the only thing that is worth it is Jesus. And we did that. It was great until one of the deacons that we grew up with, knew most of us since like kindergarten, just made it almost impossible to work with us. He wouldn't let us use the sanctuary because we quote unquote would mess with his sound system, and he'd always have to recalibrate it, even though we never touched any of that stuff. We just sit there, and at most what we would do is just put music on through the computer, and that would just be press play on the playlist and one little slider that just went up and down. But he just kicked us out of there. He would complain about us all the time. Just made it difficult. Made it extremely difficult to do what we were doing for the youth at the time. And eventually it got so bad that we just, all of us, ended up leaving that church and going to a different church. And they went to another church. I couldn't stand that church, not because of any bad teaching, but just because it felt like I was just going to a rock concert every single time. It didn't feel like I was going to church. It just felt like I was going to a concert. And then you had this pastor that felt like he was so big that he didn't have to be there to say hi to anybody. Even the pastor that spoke occasionally when they didn't do it on screen, he wouldn't stay outside to talk to anybody sometimes. And I was so used to my pastor when I was growing up. Yeah, it was a much smaller church, but he made time to see his flock, to talk to them, to say hi to them after the service and be in the back to pray for them and everything. Even the non-denominational church I go to now, at least the pastors have that time to do that between services, to be outside to talk to people, say hi to people, pray over people. But at that time, that was just kind of like, nope, don't like that. So I went to another church in a more well-off area of town, and got involved with the youth, started helping out over there. I want to say I was doing that for almost 9 months, and my wife at that time got pregnant with the second child, and when that came about, I was like, hey, gonna take 3 months off to help with the baby and everything. And I was so used to the church I came from growing up. If you were out sick, you had a baby, you had a surgery, you just went missing, people would call and follow up. People would bring over food, people would reach out. Here, nothing. It was like I didn't exist. And then when it was time to go back, it was like I didn't exist. It was like, well, how do you want me to help? And they just kind of treated me like I was a foreigner and I was new. And it's like, dude, you guys have dealt with me for over like 9 months at this time almost. You know who I am. I've helped out with the youth. I've helped out with events. I've done a lot of things. And they were just so like nonchalant about me existing there. So that kind of broke my heart a bit, because it was like, man, I felt like I did all that and helped out, and not for nothing, but just like to be treated that way, it just kind of was off-putting. So I just quit going to church at that time. I kind of got angry with God and was like, if this is how your people are and how your followers are, what kind of God are you? And I was mad. I was angry about all that, because it just didn't seem right. It's like, you're Christian. You're claiming to be, a servant of the most holy, loving God in the world. And even though He's the only God in the world, but, a holy, loving God. You're claiming to be a follower, but you can't even for the life of you show love and kindness to people that you know? Like, how do you treat strangers then, you know? So it was just kind of really off-putting. I quit going to church later because of my work schedule, and because my wife at that time was very emotionally and mentally abusive towards me. I went through a divorce period with her, started dating somebody else, and luckily she's been amazing, absolutely amazing, absolutely supportive, absolutely caring, biggest heart in the world. And you know, if it wasn't for her, man, I don't even know what I would say. So anyways, you know, I'm with my new wife, my current one, and we're not going to church, but we both kind of grew up in church. We kind of both understand that, you know, there is a God, there is a Jesus, but, you know, your relationship, you know, how we treat it was like, it's just between you and God at that point. And that was fine when I was younger, but as I started getting older into my late 30s, it turned out to want to be one of those things where it's like, man, you know, there's got to be more to life than this, you know, there's got to be more that I'm missing than just living life, traveling, doing things. And I could kind of feel God pulling me back into, you know, guiding me back to Him. And I kind of would read the Bible every now and then, nothing serious. And then, you know, just, I kind of wanted more. But I didn't want, like, the superficial, you know, what I experienced, you know, church. Because I know church is not full of perfect people. And if they are, you're in the wrong church because you just ruined it. But, like, it just didn't feel the love there in the Southern Baptist community and the non-denominational community. Didn't feel the love. Didn't feel like I was important. And it's not to say that, you know, this was just a handful of churches, because I've been to another non-denominational back in high school, and even there, you know, you felt like a number. It's kind of like when you go to the deli at a supermarket and you got to pull the number tab and wait for your thing to get any recognition of any sort. So it was just kind of off-putting, and I didn't want that. So I, you know, like, let me deep dive into, like, Christianity, look at early church history, you know, because I was also at that time still angry, coming back to God, and then just kind of arguing with Catholics and stuff about how, you know, they're not real Christians. Like, who am I to speak? I'm over here sinning and living in sin and, you know, not giving God His glory and, you know, just everything else that you could imagine, you know, throughout my life. Like, who am I to speak that I'm better than these people? So I just started digging into there, seeing what was what, and then I realized, you know, everything I was ever told growing up about Catholicism and Orthodoxy was completely wrong. And just kind of started looking into them and realizing that, you know, my judgments I had were totally false, totally just absolutely misguided. You know, I used to think they prayed to Mary, and then when I started reading about it and learning about it, hearing the different debates, hearing people talk about it, it's like, oh, they don't pray to Mary. You know, they ask for intercessions. I didn't believe you could do that. But then when I started looking into the scriptures that everybody says sola scriptura, you know, it confirmed, you know, hey, you pray with one another, you ask others to pray for you, you do all these things, you know, and if I'm to believe that we die and go to heaven, who's to say that they're not saints and alive? You know, if the early church was treating them that way, why not? I mean, look at Jesus. He came down with Moses and I forget who else, forgive me, when he ascended up into heaven, but he was there with them. That tells me they're alive. They're there. They're serving a purpose. So, you know, last year, after just kind of studying it, reading about it, I was like, you know what? You know, I know I'm going to a non-denominational church every now and then. I know we've been invited by friends to go. Let me just see what this is all about. Let me just try the rosary. So I downloaded the Hollow app because that was the only thing I knew. Tried it out on a long drive, and I was like, man, this feels stupid. But you know what? Just try it. You know, and I was going on a lot of drives last year in the beginning of the year. And after, I would say, probably about like 2 weeks, it didn't feel stupid anymore. And I started to see, you know, my faith growing stronger and my walk growing closer to God, and me actually, caring about what God thinks about me, and, you know, all these other things. And I actually started caring and started growing closer and wanting to grow closer to God, wanting to learn more. And I did it with more sincerity. And I would pray for my family. And I went from last year, we would go to church maybe once every other month, to we go on a weekly basis now. Yeah, it's not a Catholic church, but it's a church. I'll take it. It's a victory. And I just feel God working in that. So, got back in the church, kind of felt God doing this call, and I'm praying this gets used by God to help others. You know, I'm praying that, you know, I can help other Christians of all denominations, including Catholicism and Orthodoxy and all that, to kind of see that, hey, we need to unify. The whole world's going to hell, and we're too busy arguing with one another. So, let's see what happens. I mean, pray for me. If you want to tell me something that I don't know, you want to correct me, I'm more than happy to read it. I'm more than happy to respond to it. I'm more than happy to research it, look into it. So, I'm available. I'll do my best to reach out to everybody. I'll do my best to do what I can. In the meantime, you know, please like and subscribe, spread it. I'd appreciate it.